Hello everybody and welcome to the new video on the HLTCO YouTube channel. Last week I did a summary of the Tottenham ownership with Daniel Levy, Enoch and all of the different problems they've experienced over the last 10 or so years, and I was very pleased with how it went down. Thank you everyone who has replied to it or watched it or shared it, etc, etc. The reaction has been extremely heartening for me, given the fact this is a very new YouTube channel and I'm looking to build it organically. This week I'm going to be covering Everton, a club that I think it's fair to say, if you've not been living under a rock for the last couple of weeks, have been going through all sorts of problems. Of course, Frank Lampard, the former Everton manager, has now lost his job, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's, the be-all and end-all of their success or failure. In many ways, Frank Lampard's tenure as Everton boss was really the tip of the iceberg in terms of the problems that Everton Football Club have been experiencing, not just in recent months or years, but indeed for much of the last decade and indeed before that as well. So this video today is going to attempt, in a very similar fashion to the way that I broke down the problems at Tottenham, to give an overview of the issues at Everton, the reason for supporters feeling so aggrieved with the structure behind the scenes and exactly why they are pretty much geared up to fail for the most part. Of course, just like the Tottenham episode, it is a multifaceted issue, and I'm not expecting to be able to cover every single element of the issues that are plaguing Everton Football Club, because I would need 2 or 3 hours to even fit it all in. But hopefully over the course of the next few minutes I will be able to give a pretty good overview of exactly why Everton fans are feeling so apathetic towards the board at the moment. Having spoken to a great number of Everton fans about the issues that currently exist around their football club, the recurring theme for the most part seems to settle on Bill Kenwright. I think it's quite an interesting dynamic, to be quite honest, when you consider the way that Bill Kenwright is spoken about and looked upon through large swathes of the media in this country. He is seen as somebody who is, in air quotes, a true Evertonian. He is someone that is painted as having the best interest of the club at heart and truly caring. And whilst I don't deny, and I don't think any Everton fan would deny, that Bill Kenwright does really care about Everton Football Club and wants it to succeed, there is a suggestion from an ever-increasing number of voices associated with Everton FC that he is not obsessed with power. I think that's probably the wrong way to frame it. But if you look at the mechanics that saw Farhad Moshiri take over the football club in 2016, and you read further into this as a particular topic, there is a suggestion that he is a little bit drunk on the control that exists when it comes to his role within the Everton hierarchy, because, as I say, the recurring theme whenever I've discussed this with Everton fans over the last few days is that the only reason Moshiri is even having been allowed to take a role on the Everton board is on the proviso that Bill Kenwright will continue to have a say in the goings-on of Everton Football Club, rather than just passing it over to somebody else and allowing them to do as they see fit with the football club. Of course, every set of fans will say that their club and supporters deserve success. I think, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and it doesn't matter whether you support a Premier League club or a club in non-league. You want to see your team succeed and you want to see your team grow on and off the pitch. But when looking at Everton specifically, I think it's important to put historical pedigree into context, because as much as they aren't in the modern game looked upon as a true powerhouse, they do have a huge weight of reputation that goes before them in terms of their previous titles, in terms of their previous success in decades gone by. And with that in mind, when you consider the influx of money from abroad in recent decades when it comes to the Premier League and the different clubs at the top of that particular pyramid, it's beggars belief really that Everton, as you would classify them, a big club, haven't been taken over by a different body or group prior to Farhad Moshiri coming onto the scene in 2016. And I think the overwhelming view of Evertonians that I have spoken to is that there have probably been all sorts of different ownership models that have sort of come along and inquired as to the availability of Everton Football Club as a potential project for them to take on, in much the same way as, of course, the Saudi Public Investment Fund have now done with Newcastle United. But for whatever reason, those different plans or projects have fallen by the wayside, and the overwhelming suggestion is that they have all come that way because they have all involved Bill Kenwright stepping to one side and having no say in it. And, you know, it is difficult as a neutral to suggest that that hasn't been the case. I know there have been numerous people that have said to me that Sheikh Mansour, prior to his involvement with Manchester City, inquired about the availability of Everton, only for that deal to not get off the ground. And, you know, of course, we don't know the ins and outs, we don't know the specifics, or whether or not there was ever a serious inquiry as to whether or not it was an available football club at that point. After such a long spell with Bill Kenwright in charge and in the boardroom, I think it's fair to say that Farhad Moshiri isn't necessarily a yes man for Bill Kenwright, but he has certainly allowed Bill to manipulate the situation so that he still retains some degree of say over the goings on at Everton Football Club from day to day. I don't think there is any doubt in anyone's mind, whether they happen to be a partisan Everton supporter or a neutral, that Moshiri is a man who has thrown a large amount of money at this project. There has been no reluctance from him to spend heavily and try and, you know, really push Everton up that Premier League table. It's not a case of money not being made available. I think the main gripe that I continue to hear from Everton fans is that the money itself has been spent in a very slapdash fashion, and that the general perception of Everton Football Club, particularly in 2023, is that of a football club who have all of their ideas muddled. You know, I spoke last week about Tottenham and them trying to play at being a big club without necessarily backing the manager as and when the time came. I think, if anything, Everton are a slightly different case to that, because numerous managers have come in and spent heavily, and it has put them in a very difficult position in terms of financial fair play. And the general perception from Everton's fans, as far as I can tell, is that Farhad Moshiri has thrown loads and loads of money at this project without putting people around him on the board and in terms of the structure of the football club behind the scenes who truly understand the way that the business works. As I said last week, football is not like any other business. It is a very emotive thing. It has ups and downs of extreme proportions, and with that in mind, it's very easy to get carried away on this emotional roller coaster with results from week to week. And if you aren't going to put people around you within the boardroom and within the scouting, coaching setup, wherever you may look, who have that pragmatism and that long-term approach, then ultimately you will be playing with fire and potentially ending up in a situation as we find Everton in 2023, you know, staring down the barrel of a potential relegation and with all sorts of financial peril coming alongside it. And that is where the interesting aspect of this relationship that Everton fans have with Farhad Moshiri really takes a different twist, because ultimately, I do genuinely believe that their fans view this as a marriage that is destined to fail, purely because there is a lack of cognitive thought behind the scenes. There's not a lack of willingness. There is obviously a desire from everyone associated with Everton Football Club to make this into a long-term success. But you do have to have difficult conversations. There does need to be a blueprint in place to make sure that you don't just throw money at a project every single time the manager changes. And maybe, you know, do cut your cloth accordingly for 6 months to a year. Make sure that the squad is gradually rebuilt, rather than just giving huge amounts of money to a new manager, seeing it not work out, and then moving on to the next. Because in the end, as I will go on to discuss further in this video at a slightly later point, you end up in a situation where financially you are bang up against it with no room left to run. One particular Everton fan, Alex, if he is indeed watching this video, hopefully he is, likened the situation at that football club to me when trying to sum it up by saying that it's as if there is a huge fire raging in the corner. You are throwing money at that particular fire in the hope of dampening it down, only for the fire to engulf every single pound note you have, and then find that the fire is not only bigger by the time you've run out of money to throw at it, but you have no money to call people with expert logic to actually solve that problem and put the fire out. And, you know, of course, there are all sorts of metaphors and ways that we can look at this Everton situation and decide upon the correct way of framing it, but it was quite a solid one for me, because there isn't a gripe from Everton fans, as far as I can tell, about the money itself being spent. It's the method with which it's been done, and it really feels as though they are playing fast and loose with their Premier League status at the moment, because you look at the relegation battle they went through with Frank Lampard at the helm at the end of last season. Of course, they dramatically managed to stay up with a victory against my side, Crystal Palace, unfortunately for me, at Goodison Park, but it feels at this stage as though that was just the calm before the storm, really, because you look at the financial fair play regulations that they are going to probably fall foul of, you look at the financial peril that relegation will bring, and it's very difficult to see in the immediate how Everton would recover from relegation from the Premier League and into the Championship. There has also been a huge sense of frustration over the different managers that have been appointed at Everton in recent years post Roberto Martinez. Of course, if you rewind a few years prior to that, you can look towards David Moyes as the absolute picture of stability. You know, that team that were challenging around the European places were very much built in his image. They had hard-working players. They felt as though they were all pulling in the right direction. He, of course, went to Manchester United, a job that he was never going to turn down. But if you do look post Roberto Martinez at the managerial choices Everton have made as a club hierarchy, they have lurched from one style to another. They have thrown huge amounts of money at different managers throughout that era, and it has left them pretty much up against it financial fair play wise, because every single time they have changed this system, they have allowed a manager to spend large amounts of money and then sack them when it doesn't work out immediately, thus hampering the manager that's going to come in and follow them with players that they don't necessarily want, who don't fit their system. And that constant lurching from one style to another has left them in a situation now where, having relieved Frank Lampard of his duties, they don't have the capability really to go and throw money at it in the closing stages of this January transfer window to try and rectify what is a genuine relegation battle that they find themselves in. There are a vast number of different examples that you can give towards this particular end, speaking about Everton managers who have come in and ripped up the script before ruining it for the next manager to follow them. But one particularly high profile example that really does, I think, show it as a microcosm was Rafa Benitez's call to sell Lucas Digne to Aston Villa, a player that Everton fans had a huge amount of respect for and viewed him as a genuinely, good player within their system. The call itself isn't necessarily one that you can blame Rafa Benitez for, given what he was looking for in that particular position. But Everton's call to allow that transfer to take place, only to then sack Rafa Benitez 2 weeks later, really does speak to the muddled thinking that exists behind the scenes at Goodison Park, and highlights exactly why so many Everton fans are at the end of their tether with the hierarchy and this lack of long-term thinking that exists. It's very easy to say from an outside point of view looking in that a lot of money has been spent, but if there is never a sense that there is a long-term plan in place, you are just going to end up in a situation where every single transfer is viewed as a huge risk before a ball has even been kicked with that player. And I think really that Digne situation with Rafa Benitez and then the sacking of Rafa only a couple of weeks later is the perfect example of it. There is also the question of the relationship between Kia Joorabchian, I believe I have pronounced that correctly, and the Everton board. According to numerous sources, he is quite close to certain members of the Everton hierarchy and has recommended a number of signings in recent years, some of which have worked out okay, but others have not. And when you are beholden to one particular agent or one particular person within that footballing landscape, it does lead to worries about, back scratching of, dodgy dealings, etc., etc. And whilst everything may well be above board, I think the scepticism Everton fans have now really brought to the fore with this ownership structure is leading to a disconnect between those supporters and the people in the boardroom that is on the verge of being irreparable. The Moshiri era at Everton has seen all sorts of money spent. As I have mentioned earlier in this video, it's never been a case of Moshiri being backwards in coming forwards with the deals that he has done to bring players into Everton. There was actually a graphic which I am going to slightly refer to the left of me here on the screen. And there were 12 players signed for £25 million or more by Moshiri, totalling £346 million. This is so far, of course, because he remains remains in charge of the football club as I record this. There are a further 6 players totalling £129.6 million that have been signed by Moshiri or during the Moshiri era. And I'm not suggesting every single one of those has been a complete flop, because there have been successes, there is no doubt about that, but alongside it there has been a huge amount of money spent that has not been to the betterment of that football club and to the squad, largely because certain managers have brought those players in and it hasn't worked out for them or the manager. The manager has then been changed and we find ourselves with Everton going down a completely different path. But either way, it's an incredible amount of money there. What is it? £480 million spent over the course of 6 or 7 years on incoming signings. And you look at the success they've had, or lack of, and it really does shine a light on the fact that there is a lack of joined up thinking taking place behind the scenes on Merseyside. Whilst no one would suggest that Farhad Moshiri is blameless in this entire situation, I think it is key to point out at this particular point of the video that the relationship between Everton's fans and Bill Kenwright is the one that has suffered death by 1,000 cuts. There are numerous long-term gripes that Everton's fans have with their shareholder, former owner, Bill Kenwright, and they go all the way back to Wayne Rooney moving to Manchester United back in 2003 or 2004, I believe it was. There were suggestions at the time from Bill Kenwright that Wayne Rooney had forced his way out of the football club. They have since come under scrutiny from Everton's fans. You've got situations in which Bill Kenwright said that Goodison Park was on its last legs and they needed to move, that the Kirkby Stadium had to be the one that they ended up getting off the ground. All of these plans have fallen by the wayside, and gradually, as I say, over the course of 2 decades plus, you have seen a situation in which Everton fans who do want Bill Kenwright to be successful and have the best interest of the club at heart, they have just lost faith in the long-term planning of him and his desire, it seems, to cling on to power in the Everton boardroom. And it has led to this situation where you're almost watching a civil war unfold from afar, because there have been issues with security breaches or concerns over those particular security breaches, which have led Everton fans to have real scepticism about whether or not they can even trust what is coming out of Bill Kenwright's mouth from week to week. Of course, you can look towards their new stadium as a real burden on their shoulders. It's something that will, in the long run, of course, be fantastic for Everton Football Club, and it will increase their revenue from match days by a huge scale. It's going to make sure that they are sustainable in the long term, but I believe the cost for that stadium is more than £700 million, and it really does place huge importance on Everton staying in the Premier League if they are to continue to finance it and make sure that they are relatively sustainable from week to week. As I've already mentioned, they are bang up against it from a financial fair play perspective. They have recently relieved Frank Lampard of his duties. They are going to have to pay compensation to him and his coaching staff, and then get a new managerial team in place as well. Not to mention the fact that we're at the end of the January transfer window, and if deals are to be done, they will come at a premium. All of it really creates something of a powder keg when it comes to Everton's prospects as a long-term financially sustainable club, because as much as a new stadium obviously is all singing, all dancing and can provide you with revenue for many, many years to come, you still need to be able to pay for that. And you look at their situation, it's been precarious for them throughout the entirety of last season. They stayed up by the skin of their teeth then, and you look now at a team that seemingly are even worse than the team that finished the previous campaign, and you do wonder whether or not they will have enough about them, regardless of who is in charge in the dugout, to actually stave off the threat of relegation for another year. Another very interesting aspect of this story is the involvement of Alisher Usmanov. It's not necessarily a name that you will be familiar with if you are not an Everton fan, but there has been all sorts of suggestions from different media publications, most notably in recent weeks a piece published in The Guardian, to suggest that Usmanov was actually present at numerous interviews with prospective Everton managers as recently as last year. Whether or not those allegations can be proven remain to be seen, but if you are unaware, Alisher Usmanov is a key ally of Vladimir Putin, who has had his assets frozen by the government following on from the outbreak of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So it becomes an extremely murky and difficult story to really gauge, because if he does have direct involvement within Everton Football Club, albeit not with his name above the door as it were, then you do potentially lead down a path in which Everton will be embroiled in a very difficult financial situation going forward, not just because of their own status as a Premier League football club, but because of the murky dealings that have been taking place behind the scenes. So that is, another issue for Everton's fans to sort of contend with in what has become a genuine mess from week to week. The last few days by themselves have been worthy of an entire podcast, you could argue, because of course Frank Lampard has been relieved of his duties at Goodison Park. You've had Farhad Moshiri going on to talk sport with Eye of the Tiger playing in the background to reiterate his dedication to the football club. You've had that super agent going on to talk sport once again to talk about the number of players that he has offered to Everton that they've turned down over the years. You've had Danjuma, the prospective new signing, doing a U-turn at the very end of the deal. I believe he refused to send the final piece of paperwork to the FA and is instead joined Tottenham Hotspur now following Frank Lampard's departure from the football club. You've also got Anthony Gordon at this time, as far as I'm aware. This afternoon on Friday, he is refusing to train with the football club and has already reiterated his desire to leave. And this has all happened within the space of the last 7 days. If you are a football club that are staring down the barrel of a gun with relegation as a very real possibility, the last thing you are going to want is to have all of these different fires to put out wherever you look. And it just feels as though Everton are pretty much destined to lurch from one crisis to another for the rest of this season at the very least. Even if you were to look at the current managerial recruitment process that is taking place with Marcelo Bielsa and Sean Dyche, it becomes very clear very, very quickly that even though both of those men are fantastic coaches in their own right, the people that pour scorn on Sean Dyche's record with Burnley, to me, are not worth any time or care. And of course, Marcelo Bielsa has done fantastic things throughout his career, most notably in this country, of course, with Leeds United. But if you look at their two tactical profiles, they are poles apart. You pretty much couldn't get two different managers than Sean Dyche or Marcelo Bielsa. And that in itself, I suppose, properly highlights the difficulties that Everton fans have with having faith in this board. If you are interviewing two very, very different candidates, it's very difficult to see what the long-term plan is, unless it is just a case of trying to stave off relegation for another year and going again. Marcelo Bielsa, as far as I'm aware, has never actually been parachuted into a football club mid-season. He is known to have concerns about whether or not his tactical ideology can mesh quickly with these Everton players, and about the stability of the role behind the scenes, given the churn of managers across recent seasons at Goodison Park. So, it's a complete mess, even the recruitment process that is underway at the moment. You look towards managers that should be coming in with a spring in their step, happy and willing to represent Everton Football Club, and it still feels as though it's chaos from the very beginning. There have been 3 different directors of football that have been in place at Everton in recent seasons. You've had Steve Walsh, you've had Marcel Brands, and now currently Kevin Thelwell. And Kevin Thelwell, as far as I can tell from conversations with Everton fans across recent days, is being tasked with lowering the age profile of this squad whilst bang up against it from a financial fair play perspective, having lost the manager Frank Lampard and that sense of stability that would have seen someone like Danjuma come in, and also being well aware that if they are relegated from the Premier League and into the Championship, the entire plan is going to have to be blown up anyway. Even then, there are suggestions from numerous people within Everton's fan base who are seemingly quite well connected that Kevin Thelwell is being made to do that job with one hand tied behind his back. And you do just wonder why there is this lack of willingness from the powers that be at Goodison Park to allow the experts and the people that would seemingly have the best ideas going forward to bring long-term stability as to exactly what the football club should be doing, rather than putting people in place who clearly aren't qualified for the role itself. When looking at the current situation at Everton, you must also factor in that a large number of their first team players do not have clauses in their contracts which will see their wages dropped at all in the event of relegation. Of course, they are a football club that have been present in the top flight since 1951, I believe, so maybe there is a little bit of taking it for granted and expecting things to just work out in the end, but it does show a lack of long-term thinking and a lack of realisation as to the gravity of the true situation that Everton find themselves in. Of course, if you rewind to Carlo Ancelotti's time in charge, it felt as though they were on the verge of having, sustained upward momentum, but there should still be a degree of financial reality to it and insertions of deals that will see contracts dropped, because if you've got this squad at Everton with bloated wages as it is, drop down into the second tier of the English game with no guarantee of getting straight back up. If you look at the competitiveness that exists in the Championship now, there is no guarantee of promotion just because you are an established Premier League team. Of course, Burnley are managing it under Vincent Kompany as things stand, but there has been a huge churn of players there and a real ripping up of the rulebook in terms of what the Clarets can expect to play week after week. And Everton, with the best will in the world, when you consider the individuals behind the scenes at Goodison Park, just don't look primed for a similar approach to any potential relegation that might come their way in May. The last few weeks have really shone a spotlight on the difficulties that exist and the disintegration of the relationship that Everton fans have with their current board. There has been prolonged protests before, during and after recent home matches. There was a statement that was released by the Everton board which suggested, having had discussions with people inside the football club, that it wouldn't be safe for certain board members to attend a recent home game. The reason given for that largely was that a female director, Denise Barrett-Baxendale, was said to have been got into a headlock at a recent home fixture, and I think it really does speak to the lack of trust that Everton fans have with their board of directors as things stand, that we have found ourselves in a situation where a growing number of Everton voices are demanding that CCTV footage is revealed to the public, because they are genuinely in a situation where they don't believe that Denise Barrett-Baxendale has been put into a headlock. The reason given for them not reporting it to Merseyside police in a formal fashion was that they didn't want to make an already delicate situation more inflamed. But I think there is a suggestion from numerous Everton fans that there is a desire from Everton's board of directors to get favourable coverage in the media, to try and spin it that the Everton fans are out of control, they are asking unreasonable questions, that it's becoming too much, that it's oppressive, when really the vast majority of Everton supporters just want clarity over their situation, clarity over exactly what the long-term plan is, who the manager's going to be, whether or not they're going to be financially sustainable in the event of relegation. All of these things are a big melting pot of a potential disaster, and if you aren't going to release the CCTV footage, then unfortunately, as I just mentioned, it is the perfect show of the disintegration of trust that Everton's fans have with their current board. I think, in a strange way, if it weren't for the potential financial peril and Armageddon that would come with relegation, there are a large number of Everton fans that wouldn't even be against the idea of dropping down to the Championship, regardless of the fact they, of course, have been in the top flight of English football since 1951. There is a real desire, I believe, to clear the decks at Everton, to make sure they can wipe the slate clean, start afresh, get rid of all of those big earners on bloated contracts that don't necessarily care about the football club, get a manager in that can build for the long term. All of these things sound fantastic in isolation, but with the new stadium, with the financial peril that will come should they fall out of the top flight, there is this constant need to try and ensure that Premier League status is preserved, and it is stopping them from being able to build for the long term, which is very much ironic, of course, given the fact that the stadium seemingly does future-proof them against any financial difficulties in years to come. But it still needs to be paid for. A £700 million stadium bill cannot just be magicked away over the course of 3 or 4 years. It needs sustained Premier League football, and with that in mind, it leads to these lurching decisions, going from one manager to another, spending large sums of money on players to try and get that magic formula right, when really you may well need to go back to basics, provide a long-term manager with real stability and the guarantee that he will have 2 or 3 years in charge regardless of relegation. Unfortunately, they don't find themselves with the flexibility to do that when you look at financial fair play regulations, when you look at the wage structure and everything else. I appreciate that this has been quite a long video. Hopefully I haven't rambled on too long, but I think in summing up, the essence of Everton Football Club, if you were to look at it from the outside in, say 5 or 6 years ago, is that they were a team and an organisation that should have been bulletproof in terms of their Premier League status, because they had been there so long. They had a mentality that was quite rightly a Premier League one, but the mismanagement at all levels of the football club have led to a gradual decline in the quality of the team, in the quality of the results, in their long-term stability in the dugout, and it has all led to a death spiral, really, that at this stage it is very difficult to see a way out of. You know, I'm not suggesting that Everton Football Club are going to cease to exist. For my money, even though it often is said, they are far too big to go down that particular route. But when you do have such a sizable stadium bill to pay and all of these different fires to put out in every single direction that you look, it is a pretty grim situation, whether you are an Everton player, a coach, a fan, or even a director. You know, at the moment, there is no real light at the end of the tunnel. Even if they were to stay up at the end of this season, they will want, as a supporter base, quite rightly, to feel as though there is a long-term project that they can all get behind. But at this stage, with Farhad Moshiri having spent so much money and seemingly looking for a way out, with Bill Kenwright's stock amongst Everton fans as low as it's ever been, and with genuine questions over whether or not what they are saying in the press in relation to threats against their own safety are even true, it just feels like a melting pot of misery and apathy towards one another that can only go in one direction. Hopefully I have done that subject justice. I am acutely aware that as a Crystal Palace fan, talking about Tottenham last week and talking about Everton this week, it's often easy to fall foul of slight little misconceptions or things that I have otherwise missed or glossed over. I have done my best to research this as well as possible. Hopefully it comes across in the video. And if you are someone that has enjoyed this, then please do consider giving it a like, clicking the subscribe button and helping this channel to grow organically. As I said last week, it's very much a case of long-term growth for me. I don't want to just do this for a couple of months and then you never see me on YouTube again. Just like my Twitter output, I intend to be here for the long haul, hopefully 10, 20, 30 years, consistently providing content for you that is both well researched and interesting. That is my overall aim. I'm never going to be someone that's going to come onto YouTube screaming and shouting or, you know, with special effects here or there. I want these pieces to be relatively long but informative and ultimately leading down a path in which you can understand a football club other than yourselves with a greater deal of depth. And if you are an Everton fan, hopefully you feel, as I say, that I have done this subject justice. If you want to hear more from me, I also do daily podcasts on Crystal Palace and general football from Monday to Friday. That's on Patreon. They are £2.50 a month each, or if you want both tiers, so you get 10 podcasts a week, it is £4 a month. And other than that, there isn't a great deal for me to add on this fine Friday afternoon, so I will leave it there and look forward to speaking to you again for another video next week. Bye for now.